So this is my final project. I'll be looking at the film Three Phoenix Sisters and displaying my thesis of why I believe that the film does a good job of showing most of the common tropes in wuxia and has good action sequences as well. But in doing so, focuses too heavily in including all of these elements, and thus the plot suffers drastically. I'll be saying that there's no meaningful character development, and generally the story is uninteresting and bland, and hardly exists, or if it exists at all, it's just there as a way to drive the combat, to force the characters together in order for them to have a confrontation. It doesn't do anything meaningful, isn't interesting, and generally doesn't make for a good film outside of wanting some action to watch. So firstly, here we have the revenge element, which is obviously very common in the genre, and it's set up as something that happened in the past, and we don't even see like the parents being killed or anything, which is just another example of how little plot this has. Just from the very beginning of the revenge is set up, but we know nothing about it, not why it happened or any reason behind it. Here we have the main protagonist engaging in the trope of protecting the weak. She comes into this village, sees these two people being harassed by the antagonist's underlings, and wants to help, so she fights the antagonist. In some ways, you could say it services the plot, just because it's our real introduction to her. But all it does is show off some of her fighting prowess, and it doesn't really do anything that leads to any other plot development. The people we see here are never seen again, and the henchmen that she beats up as the second trope in this clip only serve to inform the antagonist of her presence and to be the catalyst to show off her fighting prowess. But overall, it adds almost nothing to the plot, just fulfills two more tropes. After she beat up those people in the village, she then goes to a local inn in order to get some food and stay for the night. As we learn soon into the clip, partially before what was shown here on screen is shown to the audience, but this is where she is shown figuring it out. The majority of the people in this inn are actually from her enemy. They're there to help them sabotage her by making an attempt on her life. They poison this beef ramen that she has, so she is prepared thinking that that may have been what they did, so she tests it with this to see if it's poison. She realizes that the ramen isn't poison, so that it most likely is the chopsticks. Overall, this serves to show that she's a clever person outside of just being able to beat her enemies, that she has more than fighting prowess, that she's actually an intelligent person and knows her enemy, knows how to outsmart them. While this does contribute to the plot somewhat because later scenes are shot in this inn, the people who she beats here are of little consequence. Generally, this is still just more of her beating up the enemy's henchmen, and there is even a part where some people show up right after this clip that she fights in the inn, which is why they give her a room. It's definitely not a bad clip, and does contribute somewhat to the plot, but I still just find it to be lackluster, and another example of this film capitalizing on its tropes, but not capitalizing on the plot. Speaking of just adding tropes for the sake of it, here's the death of a mentor. So we meet one of the second of our sisters, of the three Phoenix sisters. And here we see someone who we believe helped her learn to fight, mentored her. I believe later is potentially revealed to have been shown to help save her from the enemies. And we see them dying. While in many ways it's a very emotional moment for our character on screen, we've never met this person before. We don't know truly their significance. We don't know if they were once a great martial artist, they were just a father figure. We don't really know, so their death to the audience is much less meaningful. It really just serves to have the death of a mentor because we already saw the first one who we just left and didn't kill off. But in this point, we're just having to go through the death of this one. Really, just it feels to add the trope and to show a sad moment because throughout the rest of the film, there isn't really anything that tries to dry out emotion from the audience, except maybe them being captured. But in general, this is the only point the film tries to do it, but there's no context, so I don't think it really sticks the landing. Here we see a bit of the supernatural ability. She just sees a wall and jumps over it. It's good because it gets her into where she needs to be, but kind of feels forced. Another trope that's common in wuxia, specifically with female leads, is where they'll start off dressed as a man. Maybe the audience can tell, maybe they can't, depends on the film. But that the other characters don't know. So here, our main character is revealed to be the female, the third and eldest of the sisters. This does actually drastically improve the plot, and this is one trope that, while I think it is a trope, does do a good job of adding to the plot, because it means the antagonist does not initially know the protagonist and makes a big development that's later showed to the other characters. Now is where we get on to some of the more interesting parts, just because it has the traditional wuxia fighting. Obviously, this isn't a trope, really, because it's what entirely defines the genre. If there's none of this martial sequence, you can't have a wuxia film. That just doesn't make any sense at all. That'd be like having a superhero film without superheroes, or a romantic comedy where there's no romance at all. It just doesn't make any sense. Sense that defines the genre. You can't get around it. This setting also is just generally pretty wuxia. It's been throughout the entire film, not just this sequence. Just like the fighting, this isn't the first instance. I just chose to talk about it here because it's the first instance of fighting. It's more back and forth. We actually have the villains putting up a good fight as opposed to the henchmen before them that just lost. Um, Overall, this scene does, of course, serve the plot in some ways, but at the same time, as you'll see in just a second, our main protagonists lose here, which is a very common thing in the genre where they lose to the antagonist to beat them later. The thing is, in this where they fight the antagonist and lose, there isn't really any character development or plot that changes. They lose to them here and will fight them later, but nothing changes besides the location and the fact that they know that they've lost. A lot of the times, after losing to the antagonist the first time, the characters will have a big plot of development, like they meet a new ally that helps them, or they learn a new move from someone, be it supernatural or not. They do something to increase their ability. There's something that changes about the story fundamentally from that point on after their defeat that enables them to later beat the antagonist. But in this instance, that just isn't true. The only thing that changes is they know they've lost once, and this setting. Really, it just serves the point of making the film longer and have more action. The plot isn't developed, and nothing of consequence happens besides it setting up for the second fight, which really is just an extension of the first, and nothing happens as a result. So in this final clip, we obviously see the villain being defeated in a few seconds. And that's our final trope, it's an expected ending. But then also a few other tropes that we're not going to look at the specific video for, but can just talk about, are such as, well, we'll see that here in a second, where he gets stabbed and the more like gory, violence-y kind of stuff. Although it's not as much in Phoenix Sisters, but is still present. As well, there was this part where they get kind of torched a little bit. The two girls are left out in the rain, among a few other things. So overall, I think this film just focuses too heavily on a lot of the wuxia tropes. Maybe if the film was significantly longer, they'd have had time for all of that, while still adding plot. But for how short the film is, they really only had time to fully focus on one of those two things. And they clearly seem to put their focus into having all of these various tropes represented. And while I don't think that the tropes themselves are inherently bad, it just results in them not spending enough time on the plot. And overall, the entire movie is rather lackluster unless you care about just the fighting. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed my analysis, and yeah, that'll do it for my final project. Thank you.